My name is Robert Vance, and for 68 years, I believed that a man's legacy was the character he built, not the money he had in the bank. I was a teacher, a football coach, a widower who raised a good son. But then my son Leo fell in love with a woman named Chloe. And to Chloe, character was just a word you used in a speech, while money was the air you breathed. She looked at my simple life, my worn-out jacket, and the limp I faked from a non-existent accident, and she saw nothing of value. At our first real dinner together, she smiled a plastic smile and said, "Leo, dear, we should call a car for your father. A man in his condition shouldn't have to navigate public transport." My son, my only son, just looked down at his $20 salad and said nothing. That was the first time I quietly pressed the record button on a device hidden in my coat pocket. Months later, at their lavish wedding, she thought she had won. She saw me standing there, a poor, disabled old man who was an embarrassment to her perfect day. She didn't know I had just inherited $83 million. She didn't know our entire relationship had been a test. And she had no idea that my wedding gift, which I was about to play for all 200 of her guests, was the unedited audio of her own greed and cruelty. Before I tell you about the silence that fell over that ballroom when the truth came out, please let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to prove that your worth is not for sale. This story doesn't really begin with a wedding. It begins 6 months earlier in a quiet wood-paneled office downtown, a place that smelled of old leather and settled fortunes. I was sitting across from Jessica Riley, a woman with sharp eyes and a kind heart, who had been my late brother's lawyer. I hadn't seen my brother David in almost a decade. He was a ghost in my life, a genius who had disappeared into the world of tech startups and venture capital while I was chalking play diagrams on a high school blackboard. And now he was gone for good. Jessica slid a thick portfolio across the polished mahogany desk. His entire estate, she said, was now mine. All of it. $83 million. The number didn't feel real. It was an abstraction, a string of zeros that had no place in my world. My life was measured in Friday night football games, the pensions of fellow teachers, and the modest savings I had set aside in a local credit union. I lived in the same 3-bedroom house where I had raised Leo, a home filled with the ghost of my wife Sarah, and the memories of a life built on love, not luxury. The money felt like a suit of clothes made for another man. I felt a profound sadness for David, for the years we had lost, for the fact that this fortune was the only conversation we would ever have again. I left Jessica's office that day and drove my 10-year-old pickup truck home. I walked through my front door, looked at the scuffed wooden floors and the faded armchair where I read the paper every morning, and I knew that this money wasn't going to change me. But I was beginning to worry it might change everything else. A week later, I was sitting with Jessica again, this time with a knot in my stomach. Leo had called me, bubbling with excitement. He and Chloe were officially engaged. I was happy for him, truly. My son had found someone he loved. But my instincts, honed by years of reading nervous quarterbacks and bluffing teenagers, were screaming. I had only met Chloe a handful of times, but in each encounter there was a subtle chill. It was in the way her eyes scanned my modest living room, cataloging its lack of designer furniture. It was in the faint, almost imperceptible wrinkle of her nose when I mentioned my friends from the old neighborhood. I told Jessica, "It's not one big thing. It's 1,000 little things." She looks at me and I feel like she's calculating my net worth and coming up with a negative number. I explained my idea to her. It felt half crazy as I said it out loud. I wanted to keep the inheritance a secret. Completely secret. I told her I would invent a story, a small construction accident that had aggravated an old football injury, forcing me to use a cane and making it impossible to take on part-time coaching jobs. I would become, in the eyes of the world, and especially in the eyes of Chloe, a man with a dwindling pension and mounting medical bills, a financial burden. "I need to know," I told Jessica, my voice firm. I need to know if she is marrying my son or if she's just making an investment, and I am a liability on the balance sheet. Jessica listened patiently. As my lawyer, she advised against the deception. But as my friend, she understood. She agreed to help to safeguard the assets in a newly formed trust and to be the keeper of my secret. And I went home that day and found an old cane in the back of my closet. The test was about to begin. The first official dinner with Chloe's family was at a restaurant called Aurelia, a place where the water glasses were perpetually full and the menus didn't have prices. I took the city bus downtown, a 40-minute ride that gave me time to settle into my role. I wore a simple tweed jacket, a bit frayed at the cuffs, and leaned heavily on my cane as I walked in. The hostess looked at me with a flicker of confusion before I gave her the reservation name. The Sterlings. Chloe and her parents were already at the table, a perfect portrait of casual wealth. Chloe's smile was bright, but didn't reach her eyes as I approached. Her father, a man with a suspiciously golden tan, gave me a handshake that felt more like an assessment. Her mother offered a limp hand and a look that said, "And what have we here?" I sat down, feeling the plush velvet of the chair a world away from my worn armchair at home. The conversation was a performance. They talked about their recent trip to Tuscany, about the new club they had joined, about the IPO of a friend's company. I was a spectator. When they asked me what I did, I told them I was a retired teacher. Mr. Sterling nodded slowly. "Ah, public service," he said, in a tone that made it sound like a terminal illness. Chloe was the master of the subtle insult, the sweet voice delivering a sharp jab. "Oh, Mr. Vance," she said, when I ordered the steak instead of the sea bass with saffron foam. "It's so wonderful you stick to the classics. No point in pretending, right?" Leo, my son, just swirled the wine in his glass. He looked uncomfortable, trapped between two worlds, and chose silence. He didn't defend me. He didn't push back. He just let the comments hang in the air. The final blow came as the evening was ending. Chloe turned to Leo, her voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Leo, darling, we should call a car for your father. A man in his condition shouldn't be out this late. This neighborhood can be so overwhelming for people who aren't used to it." She looked at me with a perfect mask of concern, as if she were doing me a great charity. My son just nodded, pulling out his phone. He didn't see the look in my eyes. He didn't understand that in that moment he had failed the first part of a test he didn't even know he was taking. And as Chloe looked away, satisfied with her performance of a caring future daughter-in-law, my thumb found the small disguised button on the side of my pen. I pressed it once. A tiny silent red light blinked on unseen by anyone. In the quiet of my pocket, the recording began. A few weeks passed in a quiet rhythm of feigned normalcy. I kept my distance, allowing Leo and Chloe to get lost in the whirlwind of wedding planning. But a part of me, the hopeful father, the grieving husband, needed to make one more gesture. I needed to offer Chloe a bridge to our family's past, a chance to connect with the memory of my wife, Sarah. The bridge was a small, simple thing kept in a worn, dark blue velvet box in the back of my sock drawer. It was Sarah's engagement ring. It wasn't a showpiece. It was a ring bought with a teacher's salary in the 1970s, a modest diamond set in a simple gold band, but it was a vessel of immense value to me. It held 40 years of laughter, tears, struggles, and triumphs. It had been on Sarah's hand when she held our newborn son for the first time, when we bought this house, when we danced in the kitchen to an old song on the radio. The diamond wasn't large, but it had shone with the light of a happy life. I took the box out one Saturday morning, the velvet soft and familiar under my thumb. I was going to give Chloe a piece of our family's soul. I just had to see what she would do with it. I invited them over for lunch. I wanted to make the offer here in our home, surrounded by the photos and memories of the woman whose legacy I was trying to share. Leo was happy, relaxed in his childhood home. But Chloe was like a panther in a cage. She was polite, of course, always polite. She complimented my garden, my cooking, the sturdy oak table Sarah and I had bought at a flea market decades ago. But her eyes were constantly moving, taking in the scuffed baseboards, the slightly faded curtains, the comfortable but decidedly unmodern furniture. I could see the judgment in her gaze, the silent appraisal that found everything lacking. She saw a house, but she couldn't feel the home. After we finished eating, as we sat with cups of coffee, I cleared my throat. "Chloe," I began, my voice a little unsteady. "There's something I'd like to give you." I placed the small velvet box on the table between us. Leo smiled, recognizing it immediately. Chloe's eyes lit up with a flicker of genuine interest, the first I had seen all day. She opened the box. For a moment, she just stared at the ring nestled inside. I saw her polished smile falter for a fraction of a second as her eyes registered the simple design and the modest stone. But she recovered instantly, a mask of appreciative delight snapping back into place. I explained its history, how it had belonged to my own mother before me. "Sarah wore this every single day of our life together," I said softly. "It's a symbol of the love that built this family. I want you to have it to welcome you properly." I was offering her a legacy, a story, a place in the line of women who had been the heart of the Vance family. She picked up the ring, holding it between her perfectly manicured thumb and forefinger, as if it were a curious insect. "Oh, Robert," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It's so vintage. It's truly beautiful in a classic way. Thank you. This is so thoughtful." She slipped it onto her finger where it looked small and out of place next to the massive sterile diamond Leo had bought her. She admired it for a calculated moment before sliding it off. "I will keep it somewhere very safe," she continued, placing it back in the box and snapping the lid shut. "As a memento. It just wouldn't really fit with with my style, you know." She didn't reject the gift, she just neutralized it, turning a piece of our family's living history into a dead artifact to be stored away. I just nodded, my own smile feeling thin and brittle. I saw Leo look down at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. He knew what this ring meant. He knew the slight she had just delivered. And once again, he said nothing. As they were getting ready to leave, Chloe stepped out onto the porch to take a call, her voice a low, urgent murmur. I pretended to have misplaced my keys, patting my pockets in mock frustration. "Leo, could you check the kitchen counter for me?" I asked. As he went back to the kitchen, I lingered in the hallway just out of sight from the living room, where he would reappear. A moment later, he walked back into the living room, and Chloe came back inside, closing the door behind her. They thought I was still in the bedroom searching. I stood perfectly still in the shadows of the hall, my hand in my pocket, my thumb resting on the pen. Her voice was no longer sweet. It was a venomous whisper. "My God. Leo, did you see that thing? I can't believe he actually expected me to wear it." "It's a family heirloom, Chloe." Leo mumbled, his voice weak. "It's a piece of junk is what it is," she hissed back. "The diamond is practically invisible. It's embarrassing. Honestly, you should tell your father to sell it. Maybe he could get a few $100 to fix his leaky roof or something. It would be more useful than letting that shabby little ring sit in a box." A few $100 for his mother's ring. I heard Leo's noncommittal sigh, the sound of a man surrendering. I didn't need to hear any more. The pain in my chest was sharp, but beneath it something else was forming. A cold, hard certainty. I had offered her a legacy of love, and she had put a price tag on it. The recording was crystal clear. The weeks leading up to the wedding became a masterclass in passive aggression. Chloe's cruelty was never a blatant, open declaration of war. It was a campaign of 1,000 paper cuts, small slights and subtle dismissals, each one designed to remind me of my supposed place in her new grand world. The next battle was fought over something I held sacred, my friends. Chloe, in her quest for organizational perfection, requested my guest list. To her, it was a data entry task. To me, it was the story of my life. I sat at my kitchen table for an entire afternoon with a pen and a fresh sheet of paper, and I wrote down the names of the people who had built my world. There was Bill the plumber, who had known Leo since he was in diapers. He had fixed our burst pipe in the middle of a January night 20 years ago and refused to take a dime for it. There was Maria the librarian from my high school, a woman who had slipped me books on history she thought I'd like, and always asked about my wife Sarah years after she was gone. I wrote down the Garcias, my neighbors for 3 decades, who had shared countless backyard barbecues with us and looked after our house every time we went on vacation. These weren't just names. They were my bedrock, my community. They were the family I had chosen. With a sense of pride, I handed the single handwritten page to Chloe during their next visit. It was, I thought, an invitation for her to get to know me, to see the richness of a life not measured in dollars. She took the paper with a brilliant, empty smile. "Thank you, Robert. I'll get this entered into the master spreadsheet right away." She didn't read the names. She just saw a task to be completed. A few days later, they came over on the pretense of dropping off some fabric swatches for the table linens. The air was thick with a tension only I seemed to notice. Chloe was unusually quiet, her smile wound a little too tight. I told them to make themselves at home while I went to the garage to find an old photo album I wanted to show them. My workshop in the garage was my sanctuary, a place of comforting clutter and the smell of sawdust. But before I left the house, I casually placed my pen on the small table in the hallway, right next to the living room entrance. It was a perfect, unobstructed spot. I busied myself in the garage, moving a few boxes around, but my ears were tuned to the house. At first, there was just silence. Then I heard the rustle of paper. And then Chloe's voice, no longer polite but sharp and laced with disbelief. "Leo, are you actually looking at this list? Is this a joke?" Her voice was a low, furious hiss, but it carried clearly to where I stood. Bill Donahue, plumber. Maria Sanchez, retired librarian. Hector Garcia, auto mechanic. Leo, we are spending over $100,000 on this wedding. My father is inviting his business partners, CEOs, people who matter. This is not a backyard barbecue. It's an investment in our future, our brand. I could picture Leo's pained expression. "Chloe? These are my dad's friends," he said, his voice pleading. "They watched me grow up." "I do not care," she snapped back, and the venom in her voice was chilling. "This is about optics. It is about curating an experience for our guests. I will not have a man who smells like motor oil trying to make small talk with a federal judge. I will not have some woman who spent her life stamping library books judging my couture gown. It's a matter of consistency, Leo. The aesthetic has to be seamless." The words she used were so cold, so corporate. She wasn't talking about people. She was talking about stage props that didn't fit her production. We cannot have people like that ruining the wedding photos and making my family feel uncomfortable. Leo's defense was weak, already crumbling. "What am I supposed to do? He loves these people." "You are supposed to be my husband," she retorted. "You are supposed to be on my team. You will go to your father, and you will tell him that due to unfortunate venue capacity restrictions, we have to make some difficult cuts. You will tell him he needs to trim his list down to only the most suitable individuals. Handle it, Leo. You need to choose what kind of life you want, the one you came from, or the one I am offering you." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. It was the sound of my son's surrender. I stood there in the quiet of my garage, a place where I had built things with my own 2 hands my whole life, and I felt as if something inside me had just been irrevocably broken. The issue wasn't just Chloe's appalling snobbery. It was the ease with which my son was willing to discard his own history. My history for the promise of a life that glittered. I took a deep breath, composed my face into a mask of placid neutrality, and walked back into the house. They were standing ready to leave, their faces carefully blank. Chloe had left the list on the coffee table. My list. Next to the names of my dearest friends, the people who had held me up my entire life were small, sharp, elegantly drawn question marks. They looked like little daggers. "Find the album?" Leo asked, his voice strained. I just shook my head. No, couldn't seem to put my hands on it. After they left, I walked over to the hallway table and picked up my pen. It felt warm in my hand. The little red light was no longer blinking. The recording was complete. The evidence was secure. As the wedding date loomed closer, the days became a blur of errands that seemed designed to highlight my inadequacy. I was often asked to tag along for things like cake tastings and floral appointments, not because my opinion was valued, but because my presence as the token poor father-in-law was apparently required for the performance of a happy blended family. One Saturday, the task was to approve the final proofs for the wedding invitations at a ridiculously expensive stationery shop across town. Chloe insisted we all go in her car. Her car was a brand new sterile white luxury SUV that still had that cloying new car smell. It was a machine built for insulating its occupants from the reality of the road, a silent climate-controlled bubble. It was also, I quickly learned, a weapon in Chloe's hands. As I settled into the back seat, the smooth leather cool against my skin, I felt a familiar tension descend. Leo was in the passenger seat, already looking anxious, playing the role of a buffer state between two warring nations. I placed my cane on the floor beside me and watched the familiar streets of my city slide by through the tinted windows. It felt like watching a movie of a place I once knew. Chloe drove the way she lived with an aggressive, impatient entitlement. She saw other cars not as vehicles full of people, but as obstacles in her path. She tailgated switched lanes with sharp, angry jerks of the wheel and muttered insults at drivers who had the audacity to follow the speed limit. Her phone was in a cradle on the dashboard, constantly lighting up with notifications, each one drawing her attention away from the road. I could see Leo's hand occasionally brace against the dashboard as she cut someone off or took a corner too fast. He would shoot her a nervous glance, but he never said a word. He just adjusted the air conditioning or fiddled with the radio, a silent accomplice to her recklessness. I sat in the back, a quiet observer of this small drama. I've always believed you can learn everything you need to know about a person by watching them drive. It's a moment of anonymous power, and it reveals your true instincts. Do you act with caution and respect for others, or do you see the road as a competition you must win? Chloe was determined to win. I gripped the door handle, my knuckles white, and I had a premonition, a cold certainty that this pleasant Saturday drive was going to go wrong. My pen resting in my jacket pocket was already recording. The incident happened at a busy intersection downtown. We were in a left-turn lane waiting for a break in the relentless stream of oncoming traffic. The light turned yellow. A sane person would have waited. But Chloe saw it as a personal challenge. "I can make it," she muttered, more to herself than to us. She stomped on the accelerator. The powerful engine roared, and the SUV lunged into the intersection, directly into the path of an oncoming sedan, whose driver had rightly assumed she would wait. The world suddenly became a symphony of chaos. The other driver laid on their horn, a long, panicked blare that filled our car. Chloe cursed her face a mask of fury and slammed on the brakes with all her might. At the same time, she wrenched the steering wheel to the right. The tires screamed in protest against the asphalt. The SUV shuddered, violently swerving and jolting to a halt just inches from the other car's fender. In the back seat, I was thrown forward with incredible force, my shoulder hitting the back of Leo's seat. The whiplash effect then threw me sideways, and my bad leg twisted beneath me, slamming hard against the base of the door. A real grunt of pain escaped my lips as my cane clattered loudly onto the floor. For a heartbeat, there was a stunned silence inside our car, broken only by the angry horns of the traffic we were now blocking. Before Leo could even turn around, before he could ask if I was okay, Chloe unleashed her defense. It was a vicious, immediate, and utterly false accusation. "My God!" she shrieked, her voice trembling with manufactured shock. "Did you see that? Your father? He was messing with that stupid cane. It fell. It made a racket and it completely shattered my concentration. I almost got us killed." It was a breathtaking lie delivered with the passion of an award-winning actress. For a split second, it almost worked. The sheer audacity of it was disorienting. Then just as quickly, her entire demeanor shifted. She whipped around in her seat, her face a perfect portrait of deep, loving concern. "Robert, are you all right?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Oh, your leg, I'm so sorry. See, Leo, this is what I worry about. This is why I get so nervous when he's in the car. It's just not safe for him." She had, in the space of 10 seconds, caused a near accident through her own recklessness, blamed it on her disabled passenger, and then used the event as proof of her superior judgment and caring nature. It was a masterwork of manipulation. Leo, pale and shaken, just stared at her, then back at me, his mouth opening and closing, with no words coming out. Chloe pulled into the first parking lot she saw so we could all collect ourselves. It was another part of the performance. She insisted on getting out and dramatically inspecting the car for damage, though nothing had made contact. Leo, ever the dutiful fiancé, followed her out, the two of them speaking in low, urgent tones near the front of the car. I stayed in the back seat, telling them I just needed a moment to let my legs settle down. The truth was, I needed a moment to let my rage settle down. During the jolt of the stop, my pen had been flung from my jacket and had landed on the floor mat. I leaned down, groaning for effect, and retrieved it. Just as I sat back up, Chloe got back into the driver's seat, slamming the door. She thought I was still recovering, lost in my own world of elderly pain. She let out a long, frustrated sigh, a sound of pure, unfiltered annoyance. Believing she was alone and unheard, she spoke out loud, a habit she had when she was truly angry. "This is a nightmare," she muttered, her voice low and tight. "I can't be expected to chauffeur a crippled old man around the city. He should just stay at home where he belongs before he actually causes a real accident." My hand closed around the pen in my pocket. The microphone was sensitive, designed to pick up whispers from across a room. It had captured everything. The squeal of the tires, the blaring horns, her false accusation, her feigned sympathy, and now this final ugly sliver of truth. She hadn't just insulted me, she had wished me invisible, and I had it all on tape. The rehearsal dinner was held in a place that didn't feel like a restaurant. It felt like a vault. The private room was on the 40th floor of a glass tower downtown, and its massive windows looked out over the glittering expanse of the city at night. The view was supposed to be the main attraction, a testament to the power and prestige of the hosts. But all I saw was a million tiny lights, a million other lives completely indifferent to the cold drama unfolding in this room. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted duck. A single enormous floral arrangement, a monstrosity of white orchids and lilies, dominated the center of the room like a funeral wreath. Everything was designed to communicate wealth, but it spoke only of insecurity. It was a room built to impress, not to enjoy. I had arrived alone on time, wearing my best and only suit. The wedding planner, a young woman with a clipboard and a permanently stressed expression, greeted me at the door. Her eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of my outfit, my cane, my very presence, and I could see the mental calculation as she tried to figure out where to put me. My designated seat was the physical manifestation of my status in their world. The main table was a long, majestic affair with Chloe and Leo at its center, flanked by her parents and the wedding party. I was seated at a small circular table tucked away in a corner near the service door, a location that promised a constant draft and the clatter of plates all evening. My table mates were a collection of social loose ends, a second cousin of Chloe's who looked profoundly bored, and two junior associates from her father's firm, who had the glazed-over look of men fulfilling a mandatory work function. I was not a guest. I was an inconvenient piece of furniture that had to be placed somewhere. I didn't mind. In fact, the isolation was a gift. It turned me into an invisible observer, a ghost at the feast. From my forgotten corner, I had a perfect vantage point. I watched the Sterlings hold court, their voices booming with the effortless confidence of people who have never been told no. Mr. Sterling was telling a long, elaborate story about docking his new sailboat in Monaco. Mrs. Sterling was complaining about the caterer for an upcoming charity gala she was chairing. It was a performance of wealth, a constant broadcasting of their own importance. They weren't having conversations. They were reciting their resumes. I watched my son Leo in the heart of it all. He was smiling, laughing at the right moments, nodding along. He looked the part. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car, and he wore it well. But his eyes were empty. He looked like a man playing a role he had been cast in, hoping he could remember all his lines. He was surrounded by opulence, but he had never looked more impoverished. As the main course was cleared away, the ritual of the toasts began. The best man, a friend of Leo's from college, stood up and told a few harmless, forgettable stories. The maid of honor, Chloe's sister, delivered a gushing tribute to Chloe's style and ambition. Then Mr. Sterling rose, holding his champagne flute like a scepter. His speech was less of a toast to the happy couple and more of a bullish financial report, listing Chloe's academic and professional achievements as if she were a prize asset he was presenting to a board of directors. Then it was Chloe's turn. She stood and a hush fell over the room. She was glowing a vision in a cream-colored silk dress. She looked every bit the perfect happy bride. She began with the standard thank yous, her voice a smooth, polished melody. She thanked her wonderful parents for their boundless generosity and for teaching her to always reach for the stars. She thanked her bridesmaids for being her rocks. And then she turned her gaze, sweeping the room until it landed on me in my dark little corner. A slow, deliberate smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a predator that has its prey exactly where it wants it. "And of course," she said, her voice ringing with theatrical sincerity, "I want to give a very, very special thank you to my future father-in-law, Robert." Every head in the room turned towards me. I was no longer invisible. I was the main exhibit. I felt the heat of their collective gaze, and I subtly shifted the pen on the tablecloth, making sure its tiny microphone was clear of any obstruction. "Robert," she continued, her voice dripping with condescension, disguised as affection. "From the very first moment I met you, you have been such a grounding presence in our lives." She let the word grounding hang in the air for a moment, letting its double meaning sink in. To the uninitiated, it sounded like a compliment. To those who understood her language, it meant common, lowly, of the earth. She continued, "In a world that can be so fast-paced, so focused on success and ambition," she said, gesturing around the opulent room, "you are a constant and powerful reminder of a simpler, more humble way of life. And for that perspective, we are all so very grateful." The insult was so elegantly delivered that half the room probably missed it. But I saw the knowing smirks on the faces of her parents and her sister. "Thank you," she went on, her eyes locked on mine, "for giving my incredible Leo such a solid start in life." She paused before the word solid, a masterful hesitation that suggested she was searching for a polite word to replace meager. But the final blow, the one that would echo in that room and in my memory forever, was yet to come. She raised her glass high. "And I want to thank you for being here tonight. Because even though you couldn't contribute financially to this beautiful evening or to our wedding, your presence itself is the most valuable gift of all. It's a gift that reminds us and reminds Leo of just how far he has come and how truly blessed we are." She beamed a radiant smile on her face. "To Robert—" The room erupted in polite applause. A photographer's flash went off, momentarily blinding me. In that split second of white light, I saw my son's face. He was looking down at his hands, his knuckles white around his champagne glass. He was drowning in shame. But then slowly he raised his glass with everyone else. He toasted me. He toasted his own father's public humiliation. And in that moment, the test was over. This was no longer an experiment. What I had to do at the wedding was no longer an act of revenge. It was an act of rescue, an intervention. The recording was perfect. The final piece of evidence was secure, and the last shred of doubt in my mind had just been vaporized in a blaze of public cruelty. The clinking of glasses and the low hum of self-congratulation filled the room as the toasts began. It was a parade of practiced sentimentality. Leo's best man, a nervous young man in a poorly fitting tuxedo, told a story about their college days that was so sanitized it was barely recognizable. Chloe's sister, the maid of honor, delivered a speech that was a breathless recitation of brand names, praising Chloe's taste in everything, from designer shoes to apparently her choice of husband. Then Mr. Sterling stood, his portly frame exuding an aura of immense satisfaction. He spoke of Leo's impressive career and Chloe's boundless ambition, framing their union less as a marriage and more as a strategic merger of two promising enterprises. Love was never mentioned. It was a transaction, and everyone was here to applaud the terms of the deal. I watched my son through it all. He sat at the head table under the warm glow of the chandeliers, a perfect groom, nodding and smiling. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile was a fraction too wide. He was performing, and the effort was costing him something. I wondered if he felt the hollowness of it all, the immense echoing emptiness beneath the glittering surface. Or perhaps I feared he was beginning to believe it was real. I sat in my corner, a spectator at my own son's life, and I waited. I knew the main event was still to come. Then Chloe rose to her feet. A hush fell instantly. She commanded the room without effort. She was radiant, a vision in silk, her every movement graceful and deliberate. She was the star, the director, and the producer of this entire show, and she was about to deliver the climactic monologue. She started with a flawless performance of gratitude, thanking her magnificent parents for their endless support, and for giving her, as she put it, a life without limits. She thanked her friends, her bridesmaids, her wedding planner, and then her eyes, sharp and bright as polished glass, scanned the room and settled on me. She gave me a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. The performance was about to reach its crescendo. And now, she said, her voice dripping with a sweet syrupy poison, I want to say something from the heart about a very special person who is with us tonight. My future father-in-law, Robert. She paused, letting the spotlight of 200 pairs of eyes swing across the room and pin me to my chair in my forgotten corner. I didn't flinch. I simply returned her gaze, my face a calm, neutral mask. On the table, my pen lay next to my water glass, its tiny microphone absorbing every syllable. Robert, she began, her voice filled with a beautifully feigned sincerity. From the moment I met you, you have been such a grounding presence in our lives. The word hung in the air, a masterpiece of passive aggression. She didn't mean grounding as in stable or supportive. She meant grounding as in the dirt from which a beautiful flower has thankfully grown and escaped. In a world that can get so caught up in the race for success, she continued, gesturing gracefully at the opulent room around her. You are a constant and powerful reminder of a simpler, more humble way of life. And for that perspective, that lesson in humility, we are all so very grateful. It was brilliant in its own wicked way. She was complimenting me for being poor. She was praising my life as a cautionary tale, a museum of mediocrity that served to make her own achievements shine brighter. I could see the smirks on her parents' faces. They understood the code. Thank you, she went on, her eyes still locked on mine, a predator enjoying the final moments before the strike, for giving my incredible Leo such a solid start. The pause she took before the word solid was a work of art. It was a tiny eternity of condescension in which she silently communicated all the words she was too clever to say out loud, meager, lowly, inadequate. But the final brutal stroke was yet to come. She raised her glass, the diamonds on her fingers flashing like weapons. "And I want to thank you for being here tonight. Because even though you couldn't contribute financially to this beautiful evening, or to our wedding, your presence itself is the most valuable gift of all." Here it was, the public declaration of my worthlessness in the only language she understood. "It's a gift that reminds us, and reminds Leo," she said, turning her head slightly to gaze adoringly at my son, "of just how far he has come from his beginnings, and how truly blessed we are to be here in this moment." She beamed at the room, a radiant smile of triumph. "To Robert." The applause was immediate, a wave of polite, conditioned sound from a room full of people who either didn't understand the insult or didn't care. A photographer's flashbulb popped, capturing the scene for eternity: the triumphant bride, the adoring guests, and the quaint, impoverished father-in-law in the corner. In that blinding white flash, I looked at my son. Leo's face was a deep, painful red. His eyes were fixed on the intricate pattern of his dinner plate, as if it held the secrets to the universe. He could not look at me. He was drowning in his own shame. But then slowly, mechanically, his hand rose. He lifted his champagne flute with the rest of them. In front of a room full of witnesses, my son raised a glass and toasted to his own father's public degradation. And that was it. That was the moment the last flicker of hope died, and was replaced by something cold, hard, and clear as ice. The test was over. The verdict was in. This was no longer about proving a point. This was about saving my son from the gilded cage he was about to willingly walk into. I looked across the room at Chloe, who was now accepting congratulations, basking in the glow of her perfectly executed cruelty. I met her eyes, and I gave her a small, slow smile. It was not a smile of forgiveness or of defeat. It was a smile of absolute chilling certainty. She thought she had just won. She had no idea she had just handed me the final damning piece of evidence I needed. The game was over. All that was left was to show her the final score. The wedding reception was a symphony of excess. A string quartet played softly in a corner of the grand ballroom. Their music, a delicate, expensive thread woven through the fabric of laughter and champagne toasts. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved like ghosts among the tables, refilling glasses and clearing plates with silent efficiency. Everything was perfect. Everything was polished to a high sheen. It was the wedding Chloe had designed, a flawless theatrical production of wealth and status. I watched from my table as she and Leo had their first dance. They looked like a king and queen from a fairy tale, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight. But I knew the truth. I knew the rot that lay beneath the beautiful surface. After the dance, after the cake was cut, the DJ, a young man with a bright, eager smile, announced that it was time for a few words from the father of the groom. A polite ripple of applause went through the room. I saw Chloe whisper something to her mother, and they both shared a small, tight smile. They were expecting a short, sentimental, and slightly clumsy speech from the poor old man. A little bit of local color before the real party began. I pushed my chair back, took a firm grip on my cane, and began the slow, deliberate walk to the stage. Every eye was on me. I could feel their collective gaze, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and mild annoyance at the interruption. I didn't mind. I had been invisible for months. It was time for them to see me. I reached the small stage and took the microphone from the DJ. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. I looked out at the sea of faces all turned towards me. I saw the wedding party at the head table, a beautiful tableau of silk and jewels. I saw the Sterlings looking smug and proprietary. I saw my son Leo looking handsome and lost. And then I looked directly at Chloe. She had a look of practiced patience on her face, a queen indulging one of her more tedious subjects. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady and clear, amplified by the speakers. "It is a beautiful thing to see so many friends and family gathered to celebrate a marriage." I paused, letting the simple, sincere words hang in the air. A marriage at its best is a partnership built on a foundation of trust, respect, and shared values. It's about creating a legacy not just of wealth, but of character. A legacy you can be proud to pass on. I saw a few people nodding in agreement. Chloe's smile wavered for just a second. This was not the rambling, folksy speech she had been expecting. I continued, letting a note of genuine warmth enter my voice. As a father, all you ever want is for your son to be happy, and to be with someone who sees the best in him, who respects his past, and who will stand by him to build a future. My wife Sarah isn't here to see this day, but I know she would be so proud of the man Leo has become. And then I turned. I faced Chloe more directly, my expression calm. The warm, sentimental part of the speech was over. Over these past 6 months, as I've gotten to know my new daughter-in-law, I've learned a great deal. Chloe, you have taught me a very valuable lesson. A confused murmur rippled through the room. Leo was now looking at me, his face pale with alarm. Chloe's smile was gone, replaced by a narrow, suspicious glare. You see, I was raised to believe that a person's worth was measured by their integrity, their kindness, their compassion for others. I thought your value was determined by the strength of your word and the goodness in your heart. But you taught me that for some people that's an outdated way of thinking. You taught me that a person's true value, their real worth, can be found on a balance sheet. It's measured in dollars and cents, in assets and liabilities. It's about image and optics and the brand you build for yourself. I want to thank you for that education. It has been illuminating. My voice was even devoid of anger or sarcasm. I was simply stating a fact. And since a gift should always be meaningful to the one receiving it, I said, my voice dropping slightly. My wedding gift to you both is not a set of crystal glasses or a trip to some exotic island. It is instead a kind of financial statement, an audit, you might say, a record. And it speaks in the only language you truly seem to understand. I gave a slight nod to the DJ, who with a look of profound confusion tapped a key on his laptop. The lively music that had been filling the ballroom died abruptly. In its place, a low electronic hiss emanated from the speakers, a sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. I held the microphone, but I said nothing. I simply stood there, a silent projectionist about to start the show. From the head table, I could see the Sterlings exchanging frantic, angry looks. Chloe was staring at me, her jaw tight, a look of pure fury on her face. They all thought I was about to make a fool of myself. They had no idea the fool had been in their mirror all along. Then the first recording began to play. The sound quality was imperfect, slightly tinny, but the voice was unmistakable. It was Chloe's. Her words, spoken in a venomous whisper, slithered out of the speakers and coiled themselves around the stunned silence of the room. My God, Leo, did you see that thing? I can't believe he actually expected me to wear it. There was a sharp, collective intake of breath from the 200 guests. I saw my son Leo flinch as if he had been slapped. The recording continued, his own weak, mumbled reply only serving to amplify the cruelty of her next words. It's a piece of junk is what it is. The diamond is practically invisible. It's embarrassing. Honestly, you should tell your father to sell it. Maybe he could get a few $100 to fix his leaky roof or something. The color drained from Chloe's face. Her mother's hand, adorned with a diamond the size of a small bird's egg, flew to her throat. The illusion of the perfect, happy family had just been shattered, and the jagged pieces were falling all around them. Before the shocked murmurs could swell into conversation, I let the next file play. There was no pause, no commentary, just the relentless, damning evidence. Chloe's voice again, this time sharp and imperious. Leo, are you actually looking at this list? Is this a joke? Bill Donahue, plumber. Maria Sanchez, retired librarian. Hector Garcia, auto mechanic. Her voice dripped with a contempt so profound, it felt like a physical presence in the room. I glanced at the table where my friends, the few who had made the final cut, were sitting. Bill the plumber stared down at his hands. Maria the librarian had tears welling in her eyes. The recording continued a testament to her appalling snobbery. We are spending over $100,000 on this wedding. It's an investment in our future, our brand. We cannot have people like that ruining the wedding photos and making my family feel uncomfortable. You will tell him he needs to trim his list down to only the most suitable individuals. The silence in the room was different now. It was no longer just shock. It was a cold, spreading horror. This wasn't a private, cruel comment about a piece of jewelry. This was a declaration of her values, a judgment passed on anyone she deemed beneath her. A fork clattered onto a plate somewhere in the back of the room, the sound as loud and violent as a gunshot in the dead quiet. The Sterlings were no longer just embarrassed. They looked trapped, their faces frozen in masks of public humiliation. And then I delivered the final crushing blow. I played the last two recordings back to back, an overwhelming crescendo of her character. First, the sound of screeching tires and a blaring horn filled the ballroom, making several guests jump in their seats. Then Chloe's shrill, lying voice. My God, did you see that? Your father? He was messing with that stupid cane, it fell. It made a racket and it completely shattered my concentration. It was followed a second later by the low, angry mutter she had spoken when she thought no one could hear. I can't be expected to chauffeur a crippled old man around the city. He should just stay at home where he belongs before he actually causes a real accident. A woman in the front row gasped and covered her mouth. And then, for the grand finale, the audio from the rehearsal dinner. Her voice, sweet as honey and laced with arsenic, echoed through the tomb-like silence. Even though you couldn't contribute financially to this beautiful evening, your presence itself is the most valuable gift of all. It's a gift that reminds us and reminds Leo of just how far he has come from his beginnings. The recording ended. The hiss of static returned for a moment, and then faded, leaving behind a silence so absolute, so profound, that I could hear the frantic beating of my own heart. I looked at Chloe. She was trembling, her perfect porcelain mask completely shattered, revealing the raw, ugly panic underneath. She looked from me to her parents, to the horrified faces of her guests. She was cornered, exposed, and utterly alone. But it was my son's face that held my attention. Throughout the recordings, he had been staring down, his face buried in his hands. Now slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes were red, not with tears of sorrow, but with the dawning, agonizing clarity of a man waking from a long and beautiful dream into a harsh and terrible reality. He looked at the woman beside him, the woman he had just promised to love and cherish for the rest of his life. And he looked at her as if he had never seen her before in his life. He was no longer looking at his bride. He was looking at a stranger. The silence in the ballroom was a physical thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on everyone. And into that silence, Chloe erupted. It was not a cry of remorse or of shame. It was a shriek of pure, unadulterated rage. How could you? She screamed at me, her voice ragged and stripped of all its polished elegance. She pointed a trembling finger, her face a grotesque mask of fury. How could you do this to me? On my wedding day, you spied on me, you recorded me. Her words tumbled out, a torrent of self-pity and venom. You are a pathetic, poor, manipulative old man, and you're just trying to ruin my life because you're jealous of what I have, because you have nothing. She had done it. In front of 200 witnesses, she had confirmed everything the recordings had revealed. Her final defense was to attack my poverty, the one thing she believed gave her absolute power over me. She had no idea she was firing her last bullet at a man made of steel. I looked at her, and for the first time I felt nothing but a profound pity. I spoke into the microphone, my voice calm and steady. Poor. That's a financial assessment, Chloe. And since you brought it up, I think it's time we cleared the air on that subject. As if on cue, a woman stood up from a table near the back of the room. She was impeccably dressed in a dark professional suit, and she walked towards the stage with an air of absolute authority that commanded the attention of every person in the room. She was not a wedding guest. She was a woman on a mission. She reached the stage and I handed her the microphone. "Good evening," she said, her voice clear and commanding, cutting through the toxic atmosphere like a surgeon's scalpel. "My name is Jessica Riley. I am a partner with the law firm of Riley, Dean and Associates, and I am Mr. Robert Vance's legal counsel." A new wave of shock rippled through the room. This was no longer a family drama. It had become a legal proceeding. Jessica continued, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the Sterling family. "I am here tonight to make a clarification regarding my client's financial status. Contrary to the narrative you've just heard, Mr. Vance is not in fact poor. As the sole heir to the estate of his late brother David Vance, my client has a net worth as of this morning's market close of $83 million. The sound that went through the room was a single unified gasp. 83 million. The number was so vast, so incomprehensible, that it seemed to hang in the air like a physical object. I watched Chloe's jaw drop, her mouth forming a perfect silent O of disbelief. Her father looked as if he had been punched in the gut. But Jessica wasn't finished. "As a wedding gift," she went on, her eyes now fixed on Chloe, a predator locking onto its prey. "Mr. Vance established the Vance Family Legacy Trust, funded with an initial endowment of $20 million for the benefit of his son Leo and his new wife." For a fleeting, insane moment, a look of manic hope, of pure, unadulterated greed flashed in Chloe's eyes. 20 million. The number erased everything else. The humiliation, the exposure, it was all a price she was suddenly willing to pay. Jessica saw that look, and she crushed it with her next words. "However," she said, her voice turning to ice, "given the new information that has come to light this evening through these recordings, my client signed an amended codicil to the trust this afternoon. The entire $20 million endowment is still designated for Leo Vance, but it is now conditional upon the legal and immediate dissolution of his marriage to Ms. Chloe Sterling." The final words from Jessica Riley hung in the air, sharp and clear and irrevocable as a judge's sentence. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The entire glittering ballroom, with its hundreds of guests and thousands of flowers, was frozen in a state of perfect crystalline shock. And then the center of that perfect picture shattered. Chloe made a sound, a raw guttural noise that was part gasp, part sob. The manic hope in her eyes died and was replaced by the vacant, uncomprehending horror of total ruin. Her perfectly poised body seemed to lose all its structure. She didn't faint. She crumbled. Her knees buckled and she sank to the floor, her magnificent $1,000 wedding dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. The sound of her weeping was ugly and raw, the sound of a gambler who had just lost everything on a final desperate bet. But as their daughter fell apart, the Sterlings did not rush to comfort her. They rushed to salvage the deal. Her father lunged towards Leo, his face a mask of frantic urgency, grabbing his arm. "Leo, son, don't be rash," he hissed, his voice a low, desperate whisper. "This is a misunderstanding. We can fix this." Mrs. Sterling was close behind, her face a mess of running mascara and panicked pleading. "She loves you, Leo. She was just stressed. Think about your future. Think about the $20 million. It was obscene. Their daughter was on the floor, her life in ruins, and their only instinct was to grab the money. But Leo didn't seem to hear them. He shook his father-in-law's hand off his arm with a tired final gesture. He wasn't looking at them. He wasn't looking at the money. He was looking down at Chloe, at the sobbing, broken woman on the floor. And I, watching from the stage, could see the final change happen in my son's eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even pity. It was a look of profound and absolute disillusionment. It was the look of a man who had been in love with a beautiful painting, only to finally realize it was just a cheap print. The woman he thought he knew, the future he thought he wanted, none of it had ever been real. And in that moment, he finally understood the true cost of his silence. He had been so afraid of losing her, he hadn't realized he was losing himself. Slowly, he turned his back on Chloe. He turned his back on her pleading parents. He turned his back on the $20 million and the glittering, empty life it represented. He turned and he looked across the ruined landscape of the ballroom, and his eyes met mine. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't nodding in triumph. I was just his father standing on a stage waiting to see what his son would do next. His walk from the head table to the stage felt like it took an eternity. Each step was heavy, the walk of a man carrying the full weight of his own mistakes. The guests parted for him, a silent sea of shocked faces. He didn't look at any of them. He walked past his bride still weeping on the floor, and he did not spare her a glance. He walked past her parents, who were now staring at him with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. He walked until he reached the stage, and then he walked up the small set of stairs, one step at a time, until he was standing beside me. Jessica offered him the microphone, and he took it. His hand was shaking. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at the wreckage of his wedding day. Then he turned and he looked at me. His voice, when it finally came, was hoarse and broken, but it was the clearest and most honest I had heard it in months. He didn't speak to the crowd. He spoke only to me. "I'm sorry," he said. "Dad, I'm so sorry." With a final quiet nod to Jessica, I turned and walked off the stage. Leo followed me, his eyes still red, his face a mixture of shame and a dawning fragile relief. We walked through the grand ballroom, a silent path parting for us through the stunned crowd. Behind us, the chaos was just beginning to erupt. I could hear Chloe's continued sobs, the sharp, furious voice of her father, the frantic murmurs of the guests. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world imploding. I did not look back. I kept my eyes fixed on the ornate double doors at the far end of the room, the exit. The walk to the car was silent. There were 1,000 things that needed to be said between us, and no words yet for any of them. The apology he had given on that stage was not an end, but a beginning. It was the first stone laid in the foundation of a relationship that would have to be rebuilt from scratch. It would be a long and difficult process, but for the first time in months, it would be built on solid ground. It would be built on truth. As we stepped out into the cool night air, away from the noise and the wreckage, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I hadn't come to the wedding to destroy a marriage. I had come to save my son from a life sentence of manipulation and emotional bankruptcy. I didn't lose a daughter-in-law tonight. I rescued my son from a terrible mistake. The money, the $83 million, had not been the weapon. It had simply been the light that revealed the truth that was already there. The real power had been in the small, quiet clicks of a recording device, in the simple, undeniable evidence of Chloe's own words. I hadn't used wealth to exact revenge. I had used the truth to restore order and to reclaim my family's dignity. That was the real inheritance, the only one that truly mattered. And that was a legacy worth fighting for. This story teaches us that a person's true value is measured not by their bank account, but by their character and integrity. It's a powerful lesson on how silence in the face of disrespect can be a profound betrayal, and that sometimes the truth must be brought into the light, no matter how harsh. Robert's journey was not about financial revenge, but about restoring order and dignity using the undeniable evidence of someone's own actions. It proves that the most valuable legacy isn't money, but the courage to stand up for what is right and protect a future built on honesty. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Robert's elaborate test was a necessary act of justice or a calculated act of revenge?